Buenos días, good morning. I'm Gabriela Eslava. I'm a human rights lawyer from Bogotá, Colombia. And today I'm going to tell you a story about how children started this movement in Colombia. I want to start by thanking the organizers of the Earth Rights Conference and especially Pela, for the opportunity to share with you the first climate change and future generations lawsuit in Latin America that led to the recognition of the Amazon rainforest as an entity subject of rights and expanded the debate in my country. I have two objectives in my presentation. First, I want to explain the content and the process we follow in this case, and second, I want us to reflect on what does it mean that the Amazon rainforest has rights. My presentation is going to have one specific feature, the fact that I'll be wearing two hats. On one hand, I'll be wearing the hat of one of the lawyers behind this lawsuit. On the other hand, I'll be wearing the hat of one of the plaintiffs. So I will go back and forth between these two roles whilst telling you how we built this case. We started our research by thinking about what Colombia is going to be like for future generations. 3 years ago, the Colombian government signed a peace agreement ending the longest war in Latin America. More than 5 decades of war. This means that those who are children and young today are the first generation of Colombians to officially live in peace. And they're the last that can stop climate change in a country that's highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change and that does not produce most of greenhouse gas emissions. So this brings a general question. How is Colombia going to be like in a peaceful context? But it also brings at least 3 specific questions. What is the main cause of greenhouse gas emissions? Why is this important, and who is responsible for this? So for the first question, we started our research by looking for the main drivers of greenhouse gas emissions. And to our surprise, most greenhouse gas emissions were not produced in our crowded cities. Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, the city I live in, its population is 9 million people. We are suffering for a problem related to air pollution. But most greenhouse gas emissions were not produced by the industry or public transportation. To our surprise, most greenhouse gas emissions in our country were located in the most biodiverse region of the world, the Amazon rainforest. The reason behind this trend is that areas previously difficult to access because of the armed conflict are now beginning to be colonized very rapidly. %36% of greenhouse gas emissions come from deforestation. And in 2016, 44% was the amount of the increase of deforestation. 39% of that deforestation was located in the Amazon rainforest, meaning that a total amount of 178,000 hectares were cut down in only 1 year. That increased by 23% between 2017 and 2018, meaning that 2,000 hectares were cut down. So, why is this important? It is an environmental problem, of course, but the problem is that cutting down the rainforest does not only contribute to climate change-related impacts, such as melting of glaciers, temperature increase, the increase of vector-borne diseases, but it also alters the water cycle. Given that all ecosystems are interconnected, deforestation in the Amazon does not only affect those living in the region, but also elsewhere in Colombia. For example, the rain that is produced in the Amazon moves with the wind, and when it reaches the Andes Mountains, it becomes the water that almost 30 million people drink every day, including me and my family. So we also found that 20 years from now, we will have to live in a country 1.6 degrees Celsius warmer due to climate change. So with this case, we wanted to demonstrate that climate change is a human rights problem and that it has a face. The face of those who are young today, who are not taking decisions, but who are the ones who are going to live the worst effects of climate change. We are 25 children, teenagers, and young people from 17 different cities and municipalities of Colombia. As you can see in this map, we are not only 4 of us live in the Amazon, and only 2 out of the 25 are indigenous people. So we live in cities that are especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change, and we share a collective reality. We are the generation that will face the great climate-related impacts, and we are not taking decisions on our future. So who's responsible for this? We found that the Colombian government has at least 4 commitments to stop deforestation and climate change. First, our government ratified the Paris Agreement, in which it compromised to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Second, it has a joint statement between UK, Norway, Germany, and Colombia to reach zero net deforestation by 2020 in the Amazon rainforest. Our national constitution says that everyone has a right to a healthy environment, and our national development plan says that deforestation rate cannot be higher than 90,000 hectares. But what we have seen is that none of these commitments has been fulfilled by our government. So now that we have the facts, we needed to think about the issues. How can we make a legal case with these facts? How can we prove that we had legal standing? If I'm a person who's not indigenous and who does not live in the Amazon, how can I say that something that is happening in the south area of my city is affecting me and that will affect me in the future? Which action should we use? How can we prove causation when we are talking about climate change that is caused by multiple drivers? How can we say that deforestation is so important that we need to stop it in order to stop climate change effects? How can we say that we are future generations, only proving that our life expectancy is 78 years old? And finally, which kind of legal action should we use? Does our legal system have an action to protect future generations' rights? That's why we choose the tutela action. This is a special mechanism under the Colombian Constitution to protect your fundamental rights if they are being violated or under threat. We argue that current deforestation rates and the government failure to act are violating our right to a healthy environment, and they are putting under threat at least 4 rights. The right to life, access to water, food, and health. And the evidence we had is official information from the Colombian government on greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the early deforestation warning systems, scientific papers on the relation between deforestation and climate change, and also we had some press. But we were fully aware that this case was difficult to understand for a traditional judge. This was not a traditional damage case. So we needed to prove that children who live miles away from the Amazon had legal standing. This case didn't follow a traditional path on time and space. So we asked the judge to read our case through some special lens. The principles that are in our constitution and all the laws in Colombia. So we asked the judge to understand our case through the precautionary principle, the principle of intergenerational equity, participation, child's best interest, and most important, solidarity. And we asked the judge to understand the principle of solidarity in 3 different dimensions. A solidarity with the other human beings with whom we share the same time and space, solidarity with future generations, but also solidarity with other sentient beings and nature itself. And then the judge resolved, we lose in the first instance, but we appealed, and our case got to the Supreme Court of Colombia, and the judge ruled in our favor. He ordered the government the judge ordered the government to create an action plan to reduce deforestation in the Amazon, to create an intergenerational pact for the life of the Colombian Amazon, to update the land management plans of our municipalities that do not have any plan related to climate change adaptation. And also it ordered the regional autonomous corporations, those are the environmental authorities in our country, to produce an action plan to reduce deforestation. But what is more important is that the Supreme Court of Colombia declared the Amazon rainforest as an entity subject of rights, recognizing that the Amazon is a living entity and that it has at least 4 rights. The right to be protected, to be preserved, to be maintained, and to be restored. Imagine that we have lived in a war for more than 50 years, and that now we have to restore the life of the Amazon. This is big. So, what does it mean that the Amazon has rights? That's a question that we face each time we share this case. And what we have been thinking is that we came from thinking about nature as natural resources and as a commodity. And now that the Amazon is a subject of rights, nature itself and the Amazon is that other we own respect, and it's part of our community. So I would like to end by reading a quote. A human being is a part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This is a quote by Albert Einstein, and a judge in Colombia understood that the planet does not belong to us, and that we belong to the planet. And this judge had the power to write that in a decision. So we have now judges talking about climate justice, and we have kids and children, and here you have many in Sweden talking about climate change. But why don't we think this in a broader context? And this is just the seed to start rethinking the way we relate to nature. This has been a long journey. We started 3 years ago, and there are many challenges related to the implementation. As I said, we are not indigenous, but there are many indigenous people living in the Amazon right now that have known since forever that the Amazon is Mother Earth and that it has rights. Is us that are understanding right now what they have known always. So to understand what is subject of rights, it's difficult. If we dialogue with nature, maybe we will not allow the extractivism in the Amazon. We need to, to take it beyond the paper. It's been a year since the Supreme Court declared the Amazon rainforest as a subject of rights, and we need to materialize this and to make this real. But for that to happen, we need help, because our government is not doing its part of the work, that is protecting the Amazon and giving alternatives to the indigenous people and to the people who live there to actually be able to live with the forest and not cutting down the trees in order to survive. So that's the story I wanted to share with you today. Thanks.